We love supporting and promoting the creators of musical theater throughout the world, and we would love to have your support as well. Go to musicaltheaterradio.com and click on the Become a Patron button, because a supportive community is a strong community. Good day, my friends, and welcome back to another episode of Be Our Guest here on Musical Theater Radio. I am your host, as always, Jean-Paul Jovanoff. We are heading back to sunny west coast of California for our next guest. Now, when he contacted me via our website, he mentioned how many of the people I'd interviewed were his friends. You know, people like Stephen Cole, Eric Soroida, Holly Reed, Donald Sanborn, James Marino, and the list keeps going. There's just so many people he knew. So I think any friend of theirs can obviously be a friend of ours. So I want to welcome to the show Noel Katz. Noel, welcome.
Thank you. It's good to be here, Jean-Paul.
Oh, that's awesome. And California's treating you well right now, considering everything?
Yeah, I feel like it's a good place to be because in California, or at least where I am, you're usually more than 10 feet away from other people. So it feels like the right place to be.
Yeah, I was saying that to my kids yesterday. I said, I wish we kind of lived in a warmer spot. Then it's easier to go outside, at least a little bit, to get some fresh air rather than the cold, wet that's here. But oh well. So again, thanks for coming on. And now I start every one of our interviews with the same question. Give us your 30-second bio. Who is Noel in 30 seconds?
Okay. Boy, the time pressure is
exactly
tough. Right. I'm someone who started writing musicals when I was a young teen. I wrote my first full-length musical at the age of 14, and then I kept writing them, getting the first one produced when I was 18, and then many in my 20s, so that it's been a long career of writing musicals and seeing them produced. I've also taught a lot, basically in all the major New York acting schools, but mostly 20 years with the Circle in the Square Theater School on Broadway.
Wow.
And musical direct every now and then. I also have this parallel career in improv because I got a job when I was 16 with a improv troupe. Robin Williams was one of the members. He was then totally unknown. He had not yet made a movie at that point.
Wow.
And so my improv career is kind of a parallel career, and there have been certain times in my life in which the improv and the musical theater writing have bumped into each other, which is kind of fun because it's a different way of writing musicals than most people do.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Well, I know I got some questions because I've been to your Wikipedia and I knew a little bit about you doing the research, and I definitely have something we're going to talk about later. But let's take it back to the beginning. I know you said you started early writing and that sort of thing. But when you were a kid, were you always into musicals or in theater and improv, or did that grow as you got into your teen years?
It's fair to say that I was always into musicals. I know that when I think for my 8th birthday, I was taken to a Broadway show, and in describing that show and describing what my life was like as an 8-year-old, which happens to be my daughter's age now, I was that kid who was kind of constantly bullied, constantly picked on, and therefore constantly crying.
Mm-hmm.
And in that day and age, when you saw a little boy cry, the main thing you would say is, big boys don't cry. And that idea that crying is bad was kind of drummed into me as a young child. It's kind of horrifying when you think of it today. But back then, it's like that was the thing everybody did.
Yeah.
And when I went to see the Broadway musical, there was something in it that was very moving. And I, of course, cried at this very moving thing, but I looked around and I saw that grown men were crying too, so that the theater was a place where it was okay to be a crybaby. And so I found a home and kind of had that interest in musicals from at least the age of 8.
Okay. And what was that musical? Do you remember?
That musical was Mame on Broadway, the original production at the Winter Garden. And the moving thing that happens is that Mame's husband skis off an Alp and dies.
Okay. Well, you know what? That's funny. It's a few people have mentioned Mame as one of their first musicals they saw in New York. I can't remember who else did, but yeah, it's really interesting. So you lived in New York at this point?
Right. Well, I did live in New York, but there was kind of a secret, hidden backstory behind the giving me the ticket to the Broadway show at the age of 8, is that my parents knew that they were going to move the family away from New York, and they wanted me to see Broadway before we left. And my connection to Broadway and the theater was really how I survived. That everybody knew me as that kid from New York, that New Yorker kid, that kid who loves Broadway. And I had in my room a bulletin board. And on the bulletin board, I cut out a lot of pieces of colored cardboard and tacked onto the bulletin board a map of the theater district. And on all those, in the right intersections, the right spots on the map, I would tack on little things that were shaped like theaters with little removable marquees so that I could look at whatever was currently on Broadway. And if something closed or a new show came in, I would just do a new marquee.
Wow. That is cool. A little weird, admit, but that's very cool.
I admit it.
Yeah. Sure. But that's pretty awesome, though. So you moved to California. Did you find the theater scene was a little bit different out there? How would you compare it?
It's very different. I think the main difference between New York and California is that anybody who's out here in Southern California has an ultimate goal. And that ultimate goal is to do movies and television. And in New York, where I am comfortable, where I have lived most of my life, I'm always among people who have theater as their goal. I use the phrase gunning for Broadway, but that doesn't really describe it. It's more of that people are committed to appearing live on stage. And it's not as if they're saying, oh, I'm going to do these plays and then I'm going to get a TV series, which is more of the way the thinking is in Southern California. And something happened recently that I thought, well, this really sums it up. We were in rehearsal and we wanted to rehearse a scene, and the director wanted everybody's attention so that we could all concentrate on the scene. And she literally said, quiet on the set, everybody. Okay, action. And I thought, oh, where am I?
That's too funny.
No one says that in New York.
What if you did say that? How would people react to that?
We'd be stunned. It's like, who has movies in the back of their mind? Well, the answer is Los Angelinos.
That's funny. Okay, so let's go back to your teen years. So what inspired you to write that first musical of yours?
Okay. There's it's funny because I just had a big birthday and we got together with some friends who knew me then. So we were able to talk about the infamous Miss Steele or Mrs. Steele. I don't know. She was an English teacher in the 9th grade, and she was unusual. Let's say she was a hippie.
Okay.
But I mean, unusual or unconventional makes her particularly attractive. And I think for some reason, a friend of mine was going through her desk while she was out of the room, because my friend was the kind of kid who just broke any rule that he could find. In her desk was a picture of herself in the nude. So I hope that doesn't mean that your podcast now has to carry that E for explicit rating. It doesn't get any worse than this.
I think we just gained some listeners. I thank you for that.
Well, good. But the story gets no worse. It was the word got around. And eventually, Miss Steele showed these pictures to the class. And I wasn't in the class, and I thought, I got to get myself into the class. So I kind of went to the office and I say, hey, you switch me into Miss Steele's English class? It's more advanced. And so they put me in there. And one of Miss Steele's first assignments was that we had a creative writing assignment. And she said, write something in dramatic form, like a 3-page sketch. Mm-hmm. That's what she had in mind, a 3-page sketch. And I, of course, wrote an entire 2-act musical. I recorded all the accompaniment on piano into a cassette recorder, brought the portable cassette recorder into class so I could perform the entire show for the class with me playing all the parts and singing all the songs.
Oh,
so really what inspired that first show was, I don't know, a naked picture of a teacher.
If I had a nickel for every time I was inspired by a naked picture. So that's hilarious. So did it ever get taken beyond the classroom? Have you recorded any of the songs just for fun?
Yeah. Did we record any of the songs? We had plans, and then for some reason those plans got canceled. And I don't really remember why the plans were canceled or if any of the songs, I don't think any of the songs were ever recorded. So just but they might have been, we would have lost it.
So just one of those great musicals lost in time that never got a cast recording.
Right. Well. I mean, I still have the script and the lead sheets in my garage. So it's not literally lost. It's just kind of unrecorded.
Okay. Well, I will wait for the premiere of that show at some point.
Keep waiting.
All right. So you said you had a parallel with your improv at the same time. Tell us a little bit about that, because we're going to talk about when those two lines converge. So tell us a little bit about the improv.
Right. So in those days, in my early teen years, I spent a lot of time at the piano, and I would check out complete scores to Broadway musicals from the local library. And I would go home and play every note. And it's not like I played them well, but I was kind of learning about what happens in a musical by really studying the score. And my father knew that I was just spending a lot of time at the piano doing this. And he starts bragging about me to people in his office. And he said, my son can play anything. And one of the people in his office said, I'm part of a brand new improv group, and we could kind of there's a piano in the theater, we could use some piano accompaniment. So because that woman believed my father's bragging, it's like a few nights later, I was suddenly out there with an audience behind me, accompanying an improvised show. And what my father didn't know is that at that point, I couldn't play by ear. There was nothing I could play by ear. And there was kind of no way that I could come in with like a zillion music scores.
Yeah.
Because in an improv show, you need to be able to play something by ear right away. And I could improvise kind of background music, like you might hear in a movie or a silent movie, you'd hear that kind of underscoring, and I could improvise that, but I couldn't really play an existing song. And the trouble was I kept coming up with like really good ideas for existing songs that I might play. So if in the improv, the audience asked, I'd like to see a scene in which a man wears a dress.
Okay.
Because that's what passed for comedy in those days. So I, at the piano, would instantly know that the song I wanted to play was I Enjoy Being a Girl by Rodgers and Hammerstein. I thought that would be amusing. But now I'm hunting and pecking at the piano because I can't play it by ear.
Yeah.
But as I'm hunting and pecking, I instantly know when I've played the wrong note. So it's like a picture that's slowly coming into focus. It slowly dawns on the audience what this kid at the piano is trying to play. And they're kind of nudging each other and they're saying, I think he's playing I Enjoy Being a Girl. And they're all kind of appreciating that that's a funny thing to play at this moment. And that's how the producer of the show knew that I was a keeper. That's how I got the job.
Very cool.
And eventually I did learn how to play by ear and could instantly play any song that I thought was appropriate for any scene, usually to lead into the scene.
Yeah. That's very cool that you got the opportunity to do that. Thank your dad for that. Obviously, yes. You must have.
I did
for putting you into that. So you've got your musical theater line. You've got your improv line. Now, how long did you stay in California? Were you there long? Did you go to school there, or did you go to?
No, I mean, as soon as I got the job at the improv place when I was a sophomore in high school. And then after senior year of high school, I moved to New York and went to college at Columbia right there in New York and kind of lived in the Columbia area for like the next 35 years. So if you look back at my life, my time in California seems like a small blip.
Yeah.
Or a mistake. But there was kind of a good you were asking about the overlap between improv and musical theater. I was, playing for this improv group, and someone was there who learned that I was writing musicals because I had written three musicals when I was in high school. I read 3 musicals. And this lady said, you're going to New York for college. You should know about the BMI musical theater writing workshop.
Yes.
And so I applied to that and got in. I was the youngest member of the BMI musical theater writing workshop for the exact same years that I was in college. And I really wouldn't have found out about it were it not that suggestion from a person I met through the improv work.
Okay. So now you're in New York. You're at Columbia. You graduated from Columbia with what?
Oh, a degree in English. They didn't offer a degree in theater back then.
Oh, really?
And there were various reasons not to major in music, because if you majored in music, you'd be learning a lot of stuff that didn't really apply to what you and I would think of as popular songwriting. I mean, people in that music department were writing kind of experimental modern classical music and not, songs that could put across a joke or move a plot like we're used to in musical theater land.
Great. So now you have an English degree, which, is always useful, just like my theater degree. All right. So now you're in New York. What did you do with yourself?
I wrote a lot of musicals. It's really hard to imagine what my life was like in my 20s. One, my girlfriend at the time found us a really cheap rent-controlled apartment right on Broadway, looking out on Broadway. And that meant that my expenses were so low that I could really afford to spend a lot of time writing musicals. And there's something that nobody imagines happens in New York, but it happened to me, is that I was walking down the street and I ran into someone I knew. And she said, "What are you doing here?" I said, "I live on this street." And she said, "So do I." And she pointed to her building and I pointed to mine. These were different buildings on the
Yeah.
same block of New York. A few weeks later comes a postcard in the mail, and the postcard says, "Hi, it's Kim. I never got your phone number, but I knew your address. And I have a friend who's looking for a composer to collaborate with. Here's my number. Let's get the two of you together." And so that is how I ended up writing a musical with Tony Kushner,
Oh,
who went on to become, I'd say, the most famous American playwright of our generation.
yeah, I've
And I
maybe heard
got
of him.
long before he was famous. Long
Wow.
before Angels in America and all that stuff.
Wow. And what show was that?
Okay, the name of the show is really long because if you know Tony Kushner's work,
Yeah.
you know he loves long titles. So it's called The Heavenly Theater, Hymns for Martyred Actors.
Okay. And how did that go? How was that process?
Well, the show went very well. The process, I'd say, was hell.
Okay.
I think that collaborating with Tony was somewhat of a clash. I think that he didn't trust me or didn't like the process of collaborating on songs. I wasn't used to working with lyricists at all because I'd always written my own lyrics, and I had trouble making this adjustment. So what Tony would hand me would be kind of formless, meterless verse.
Yeah.
The verse would have rhymes, but not at regular intervals. And as a composer, it was hard for me to imagine how I could turn this into a song that would work as part of a play.
Yeah.
And so I would say to him, "Tony, I'm going to need a little bit more form, maybe a title that repeats at regular intervals, just so I can wrap my mind around it." And Tony would yell at me that I was an ultra-conservative Ronald Reagan lover, which was not true at all, but it was kind of the way Tony thought at the time.
Okay.
That Tony had a passion for his politics, and if someone was disagreeing with him, he assumed that they hated him for his politics, which was not true at all. I mean, I loved Tony for his politics. I loved his political views. I was fascinated to talk politics with him and to learn what he thought. But, a guy needs a lyric to have form.
Yeah.
And in saying that, I'm not saying, "Oh, Republicans are great." I'm saying, "Oh, structure is helpful in songwriting." Very different thing.
I totally understand because I just saw Carolina Change about 2
Yes.
weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, and I was thinking the same thing. The lyrics, they're great, but they're free form. They rhyme when they want to rhyme.
Right.
So yeah, I totally understand what you're saying. Yeah.
Right. And I love Janine Tesori, who composed Carolina Change. And Janine and I worked together in college. In other words, I did a show in college for which Janine was the musical director. So years later, I read it to her, and she said that she was going to write a musical with Tony Kushner. And I said, "Oh, don't expect his lyrics to have any form." And she was able to deal with it. She was able to roll with that and to, create a terrific score with these kind of formless lyrics. And my hat is off to her.
Yeah.
That is not something I was able to do, when I was 22.
Yeah. And you know what? And that's the funny thing. I always, whenever I talk to people when I'm interviewing them, especially if they're worked with a composer or a lyricist or whoever, and they're not usually doing that, I always ask that question because, like you said, sometimes you don't always mesh, and that's not because good or bad. It's
Right.
just like life in general. Sometimes you just don't mesh, and then you move on to the whoever you want to work with after that. So that's a really interesting and cool story. I thank you for that. That lays it out for people who are wanting to work with other people. So
Yes, and
very cool.
it's a little bit tragic in that I really thought Tony was brilliant. I knew he was destined for great things. I know it's easy to say that now. But, by the time I was 22, I had worked with Robin Williams in improv, and I had said, I've met this guy in the improv troupe, and I think he's going to be a major star. And
Yeah.
I was right. And so when I met Tony and I kind of said the same thing, I said, I think I've met a seriously wonderful writer. I was right.
Yeah.
I didn't have a great process with writing with him, but I never, stopped believing that he would be a fantastic writer for the theater, which he is.
And how old was he at the time? Around the same age?
He's 4 years older. So
Okay.
if I met him when I was 22, he might have been 26.
So you were both relatively young, and fresh face. So yeah, that's a fantastic story. So after that experience, what year was that approximately?
Okay, so that was 1983.
Okay.
That show was December of that year.
Okay. And then where did you go from there after that?
Okay, so the next show after that was the Columbia Varsity Show of 1984. That was the one where Janine Tesori was the musical director. And that was one where improv had a lot to do with it because Columbia has this really long tradition of a yearly student-created show. And that tradition goes all the way back to Hammerstein, and Hammerstein met Rogers there and hooked Rogers up with Hart, and all sorts of really wonderful writers had been part of the Columbia Varsity Show tradition. And so I just relished the opportunity to step into that tradition and being, a varsity show songwriter.
Wow.
So that was the next show that I did. And the process for that one was really brought in by my friend Adam Belanoff, who said, the way we create this show is we're going to have a very funny cast, a very large funny cast, and we're going to get them to improvise scenes. And we're going to have ideas for what the scene should be. And then these actors will improvise them over and over again until we stick with a text that we like, until it's funny enough and tight enough and we've cut out the fat, and then we have something to rehearse. So The New You was very much a show that was created using improvisation.
Okay. And how did that one go? Did it get put on anywhere? Did it last?
Yes. Well, lasting is not something that happens in the varsity. Yes, it got put on and was so successful that there was a joke I had in the lyric that literally stopped the show. And we use that phrase showstopper, and we use it all the time. But there was something in that song that the audience found so funny that they kept laughing. And they kept laughing for so long that the song couldn't go on. And Janine just lifted her hands off the piano because you had to wait for the laughter to die down before she could continue the song. Well, that's what we all mean when we say showstopper.
Yeah.
But I've actually lived it. I've actually seen a song of mine literally stop a show. And in the audience was a young Wall Street guy. That is, this was the age where you could make a lot of money on Wall Street if you were very young and smart or lucky or whatever he was. And that guy said, this was so wonderful. I bet that if I put up the money, you guys could create a show for off Broadway and I'd make the money back. And all of that came true.
Wow.
He put up the money and he made the money back. And we had really our first professional show. That is, first show that wasn't associated with a college.
This is quite the story we've got going here. Like, that's incredible. So how long did that run off Broadway?
So that ran, I think, 3 weeks. Okay. There's all sorts of union requirements that limit the number of shows that you can give if you're following a certain pay scale. So it's like the union set the number of performances, which might have been 15 or 16, but it's like the run was limited by the contracts.
Yeah. Oh. So has that show ever been remounted anywhere, or is it kind of a show that's set in the time?
Yes, it's very much of its time.
Yeah.
That show is called On the Brink, and it's a review, that refers to all sorts of things that were utterly contemporary. One example is there's a woman who is, for the first time in her life, doing banking on her home computer. Can you imagine that, John Paul? What a weird world it'll be.
What is this computer?
Computers.
Wow. I'd be kind of interested to just see it remounted to look back as a time capsule of.
I think so too. I agree with you, but in there are certain things that a time capsule that just aren't going to make sense.
Yeah.
To people who aren't like historians of the period. If I say to you, Bernie Getz, you have no idea who I'm talking about right now. Or if I say, what happened in Bhopal?
Yeah.
It's like, Bhopal? What is Bhopal? And so something really major happened in Bhopal that year, and we referred to it. Yeah. And it's like, nobody knows what that was anymore. Look it up. That's Bhopal. I'm sure Wikipedia will tell you what happened in Bhopal in 1985.
Well, I know Bernie Getz. That one I do know.
Oh, good.
So, I don't remember exactly, but I do remember the name. Let's see, Bhopal. Oh, it's a gas tragedy, it says.
Yes.
There we go.
Big chemicals in the air tragedy. But it's like, when you read about these things, you can't imagine that we could ever make them funny. But, but we did. It was funny at the time. It doesn't really seem so funny now. Bernie Getz was on a subway car and he took out a gun and he shot some strangers. And you could make fun of that whole idea in 1985. But now that we've seen so many mass shootings, it's really a horrifying notion. And you just don't feel you could possibly find any humor in the subject today.
Yep.
But you got to take my word for it. In 1985, you could.
Well, when I'm picking songs for my radio station, I go back into the reviews, like the Shoestring Review of '57 and things like that.
Right.
And I'm like, do I know any of these references? No, of course not. They're like 80 years old or whatever it is.
Yep.
But you know what? Sometimes a good song is still a good song. So you've got this off Broadway hit. Let's move forward a little bit. was there any other big shows that you did or other big names that you worked with over time? Because I want to get up to 2003 because I think you know what happened in 2003, but I don't want to get there quite yet because there's probably things that happen in between to get there.
Yeah, sure. There are. Friends of mine who missed seeing On the Brink got me involved in their theater company and eventually said, let's collaborate on a musical. And that became The Christmas Bride in, what year? 1988. And what was really exciting about The Christmas Bride is that we were in a tiny theater. The theater still exists. It's now called the Tank, but back then it was called the William Redfield Theater. And it was on the same block as a Broadway theater, just down the block. I mean, so many feet away that if you were going to the Broadway theater, you wouldn't have known that our theater existed. And in that theater was the original Broadway run of Into the Woods.
Oh, wow.
And our musical director, Michael Levine, was in contact with Stephen Sondheim. And he said, Steve, you've never seen me musical direct a show. I've got this show, The Christmas Bride, and it's playing on the same block as Into the Woods. And the two of them got to talking, and Sondheim said, I've got a new person playing the witch. So what I could do is I could see the first act of your show and the second act of my show. And therefore I could see, how this lady is doing as the witch, and I could see your work as musical director. And so that is how Stephen Sondheim found himself in the audience for The Christmas Bride.
Wow. Jeez, it's just connection after connection. You've had quite the career, even at that point.
The idea is that everything leads to another thing, like a big house of cards. Things get stacked. One project leads to another, and that's what really goes on all the time.
Yeah, and just the size of the musical theater community. There's lots of people, but you find out how small it is, like just from like yourself, knowing how many people I interviewed and things like that. It's crazy how big yet small this world is, and everybody's connected somehow.
Yes, in a way, John Paul, it's not surprising, although I put it this way, but it's not surprising that you have interviewed so many acquaintances of mine for the exact reason that you're saying.
Yeah. So who was that actress or actor that Sondheim wanted to check out? Do you know?
Oh, I think it was Nancy Dussault.
Okay.
But I could be wrong. I would have to I know what month The Christmas Bride played. That was December of '88. So one can look up on IMDb and just find out who was the new witch taking over that role somewhere around that time.
Was she taking over for Bernadette Peters?
It could have been.
Yeah.
But it's like, I wouldn't swear to that because I'm sure that Sondheim would have gone in to see whoever was playing the witch.
Yeah.
I'm sure there aren't that many women who played it over the course of that run.
Yeah.
But, the info is in there. Yeah. I just haven't memorized that.
That's okay. I was just curious who it would have been.
Not my show. What do I care?
Exactly. All right. So that was in '88, you said. Anything else in between over the next few years that, were life-changing or inspirational or even, did you hit any bumps in the road?
Well, I would say that when I turned 30, it suddenly became harder to get my shows produced. Mm-hmm. And in a way, I say that's because I was no longer this prodigious young man. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's something impressive about having had so many musicals written, by the time you're 28.
Yeah.
But, if it's a similar number of musicals and you're 38, how impressive is that? So I think that being a prodigy is you can't be a prodigy forever.
No.
And so I think the bump in the road was that I just had fewer shows done in the 90s. But I'll tell you, the thing about the 90s, I don't know if you've noticed this, because I know that you know a lot of musicals and kind of place them in their historical context.
Mm-hmm.
The musicals that hit Broadway in the 1990s were very different than the kind of musicals I write. And that has something to do with humor.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that there are very few Broadway musicals that premiered in the 1990s that are funny at all.
Mm-hmm.
And as I have this history of writing musicals that do make people laugh, I mean, not all of them. Certainly, The Christmas Bride isn't filled with laughs, but it's like the type of musical I'm writing was not the type of musical that people were doing in the 90s. So I think the bump of the road was a combination of, oh, he's in his 30s now, he's no longer a prodigy, and he writes that kind of old-fashioned musical that makes people laugh. And now in the theater, we just want to make people cry and drop a helicopter or a chandelier from the ceiling.
Yeah. You never know where the theater's going to take, right? The direction of everything. Like you had the big British invasion, and then you had stuff from the 90s, and then so yeah. And you can't really change the way you are. You are what you are, and you got your style, and obviously it works. So that's what you just got to keep plugging away, and it's, keep going through.
I mean, there's a great deal of luck involved, and the thing about my musicals, I try to make every musical I do as different as possible from all the previous musicals as I can, and so it's not like I'm writing the same kind of show, but it did seem like that in the early 90s, at least, opportunities for my new musicals to get on kind of dried up for a while. And it's here where the parallel thread of improvisation rears its head once again. Because in the mid-90s, I met this woman who knew me because I was playing piano at a theater school. And she said, "I'm starting an improv troupe. I need you to be in it." And I said to her, "I don't do improv anymore. That is something I did when I was in my teens. I was a teenager. I played piano for an improv group." And she said, "I don't want you to play piano." I thought, well, that's a very weird thing to say to me. You don't want me to play piano? How am I to be involved with this show? And she said, "I want you on stage. We're going to do a totally new kind of improvisation called long form. And we're going to figure out how to do it. And we're going to take a class field trip to Chicago so we can learn more about how to do it. And we're going to perform improv with no music live on stage with you in the cast." And I thought she was crazy, but it's like, well, I'm going to say yes because I've learned that saying yes is key.
Yes.
You say yes to any offer because you never know where it will lead.
So true.
So eventually the cat got out of the bag, and people in the improv community in New York began to be aware that, yes, I do play a little piano, and I became kind of New York's #1 piano for different improv groups. I taught with Second City, I taught with various other groups, teaching people how to improvise songs, improvise operas, improvise musicals. And I really got well known in the community as the musical improv guy. And eventually one of the improvisers said, "I think you and I should write a musical because we're going to both turn 40." and we should not turn 40 without having written a musical. And I said, I've done that. I think I've written 10. And he said, yeah, but I've never written a musical, and I need your help. Can we collaborate? And he, of course, came up with the craziest ideas and the funniest ideas for the musical. And so in the year 2000, we produced Area 51, the musical, and it was a constantly funny, wacky musical, like I'd never done before. I mean, really hysterical stuff. And in the cast were a lot of members of the improv community that we'd worked with before.
So now you've married both, your musical theater and your improv, and you've been able to use both of them at the same time. That's very cool. All right, so let's talk about 2003.
Okay.
All right, so you tell us what happened, because I know, but the listeners do not.
Yes. So let's go back to 9/11, because who's not thinking of national tragedies?
Of course.
These days. So my girlfriend and I were both in New York at 9/11, and we, we're unscathed, and but we were living there. It was a very traumatic experience, of course. And she went off on a national tour of My Fair Lady. So we had this big separation going on because she was all over the country while I remained in New York for kind of the rest of 2001. And I heard a news story because the news media was looking for stories that were about 9/11 but weren't depressing.
Yeah.
It's really very much like the news media today. It's like you're looking for a story that's not going to sadden or scare people eventually, because that's what journalists do. They want to get, different types of story. And one was a story about how divorces were down, proposals were up in the wake of 9/11. And I started thinking about that and thinking, well, that makes a lot of sense. People want to commit to each other or solidify their commitment in these scary times that we live in. And there were, of course, a lot of stories about bravery, the bravery of the first responders at the World Trade Center, for instance. And so I had these two thoughts in my mind. I'm thinking, what does bravery mean? And why have I been scared to propose marriage to my girlfriend? And I thought, I can't be an unbrave one. I've watched people run into a burning building that was going to collapse. How hard could it be to propose marriage? So I flew off to where my girlfriend was on tour. It happened to be Tampa, Florida. And in Tampa, Florida, I proposed marriage. And so we knew that we were going to have a long period of time between that proposal and the actual wedding date. And during that period of time, we started talking about weddings and everything that we hate about weddings. And we hate the throwing of the rice. Mm-hmm. And we hate that ritual where the groom stuffs a piece of cake into the wife's mouth. And that's supposed to be funny. And we thought it was kind of disgusting. And so part of our bond at that time was Joy and I just thinking about all the different aspects of weddings that we didn't like. And then I started thinking, well, what do we like? We like musical comedies. I write original musical comedies. She sings in musical comedies. What we ought to do is stop treating our wedding guests as guests at a wedding and start treating them like an audience filled with people that we love. And it was like we could choose our own audience by handing them a ticket to a theater where they will see an original musical in which the two of us will get married. And we knew a guy who was a musical theater performer who happened to have the ability to marry people. He happened to be a I don't know, doctor of divinity, whatever it is, whatever credential you need to have, and he had it. And we discussed with him what was necessary, both in terms of the laws of the state of New York and any, if we had any religious things that we wanted to work in or work out. And he said, there's really nothing religious that we need to do from my point of view. And we said, fine, we're going to do nothing religious, except we're going to have a surprise. And the surprise is that when you come on, you will be followed by a gospel choir in choir robes. And you're going to do this big gospel number, because that'll give a lot of energy.
Yeah.
Usually when the officiant or preacher or priest or whoever's doing your wedding, usually when that person enters, there isn't a, hand clapping and an energy in the room. But boy, is there energy during that section of our musical. And the thing about the musical is it's not only a ceremony, it's in some ways a dual autobiography, and it's all funny, and everybody is involved. And I mean everybody, John Paul. I mean not just the preacher, not just the best man and the bridesmaids, and us, we sang, bride and groom sang, but also our parents all sang. And my niece was the flower girl. She was 4 years old, and she marched down the center aisle, strewing flowers like a flower girl does, but also singing a song that I'd written for her to sing as she did this. Wow. And the first dance, of course, was choreographed. That happens a lot these days. Yeah. But of course, our first dance was to the tune called The First Dance, which was being sung by my father. So it's like the focus was off my father because we were dancing. Yeah. Which I think got past his embarrassment, because, none of our parents were performers. So they all had to be convinced to do this. And so let's say I'm starting with my mother and I say, Mom, I'm going to do a musical wedding. I'm going to write everybody songs that fit them, and I'm going to write you a song, and you're going to stand on an off-Broadway stage and sing in front of 200 people. And she said, I can't do that. And I knew she was going to say that she couldn't do that because she's not a performer. Mm-hmm. And she would be embarrassed to do that. And I say, Mom, you don't want to do it. It's fine. But you're going to be really conspicuous by your absence, because Dad and Joy's parents have all said yes. Mm. So we're going to have 3 parents singing this wedding, and 1 mother who won't. And she said, okay, I'll do it. And then I called my father, and my father made the same excuse. And I said, you can sit this one out, but the other 3 parents have already said yes. They hadn't already said yes. I was giving the same lie to each of the parents until I got to the 4th one, by which time it was no longer a lie.
That would have been such a great experience to be a part of and see. And so that's fantastic. That's awesome. So after the wedding, big success, because I see it got in the New York Times and it got written up and yep. Everybody noticed it. You put on the show called Such Good Friends.
Yes.
And tell us a little bit about that.
So Such Good Friends, I had this idea for many, many years that there was it interested me a lot to look at what happened to the entertainment industry during the era of the Red Scare and McCarthyism, and how all sorts of entertainment artists were forced to testify before the House Un-American Activities Committee and kind of name their friends and say what left-leaning party their friends had attended with them 20 years earlier. And this led to a blacklist in which people couldn't work, either if they refused to name names in front of the committee, or if they were named. If somebody had said, "Oh, you were a communist. You went to this communist function in 1934. You can't work now." So I found that kind of fascinating and disturbing in such a way that I thought there really ought to be a show about this, but it's too depressing. Yeah. It's really a very depressing subject. And, various important people in the musical theater had been a part of this. Comden and Green are named in Judy Holliday's testimony, and Jerome Robbins named names, and Zero Mostel was blacklisted, and eventually Robbins and Mostel have to work together. So the history of musical theater is filled with stories that were kind of impacted by this Red Scare era. And it struck me that the only way to tell the story is to make sure that all the characters were really funny show business people, the sort of funny person who, when stressed, makes jokes. So I have my characters are being funny even while they're in the very dramatic situation of being forced to name their friends' names in front of the committee.
Wow. And I see that it did pretty well, that it got to the New York Musical Theater Festival.
Yes, and we won all sorts of awards there.
Wow. And did it go in, has it gone beyond that, or is it still kind of...
No, right. It hasn't gone beyond that because, and it's funny, in talking to you about it, it's like, boy, how do I explain this show and make the show sound good? Because when you distill it to the elevator pitch, when you're just saying, "Oh, I've got this show. It's about, all these writers and performers who are ruined, their lives are ruined by the blacklist, and there's a suicide." It's like nobody wants to see a show like that.
And it's funny.
Right, because no one believes it's funny. But the people who saw our show saw that it was funny and saw that our leading lady, Liz Larson, was giving the sort of star performance that's kind of once in a generation. She's almost constantly on stage, and she's being funny, and she's being poignant and moving, and she's got all this kind of great old-fashioned musical theater energy.
Yeah.
So this show really seems like a musical comedy of the 1950s because it's set in the 1950s, and everybody's talking that way because they're all funny people. But when you start describing it, or if you don't have as much time as you've given me, John Paul, just doesn't sound good to people. And I say, oh, I don't know that my audience wants to see a show about that whole period of entertainment industry blacklisting.
True. But if you just described, without attributing a name to it, the plot to Assassins, you probably get the same type of reaction. But
absolutely. But I think you can do Assassins if you're Stephen Sondheim.
Yeah.
And I really, it sounds like I'm begrudging him his success, and I'm not. But I think that, there are places across the country where they have what's called the blind submission, where the people judging the shows have no idea who wrote them.
Yep.
I'm about to submit to another one of those things. And if the names are taken off, would anybody think, oh, we really ought to produce this review about the American Assassins?
Exactly.
I don't think the show gets produced.
No.
And that's not me saying it's a bad show, and it's not me saying I'm jealous of Sondheim, but I'm saying that because it's Sondheim, people want to do it. People know that the man has a track record and audiences who are truly interested in what he's going to do, whatever it is he's going to do.
Yep.
And so you've brought up a really good example. Assassins doesn't sound like a good show until you know songs by Stephen Sondheim.
Exactly. And I think that's something that the entire new writing or just new works in general community has to deal with unless you have a name attached to it, who's going to take a risk on it and what audience is going to come out. So, and
that's why we lose out to the aging rock stars.
Mm-hmm.
It somehow is easy for an aging rock star to get their musical produced because they're already famous, or people already know their songs from the radio and assume that any song they would write for the theater would be just as good. And I don't really think that the shows themselves have borne that out for the most part. I think, if you and I were to list our favorite Sting songs, none of them would be a song from The Last Ship, his Broadway musical. But somehow the producers are behind that idea. Okay, there's this British ship factory and it's going to close and it'll be really sad. Let's produce it because Sting's writing the songs.
Yep.
It's another one. It doesn't sound like a good show at all until you know the name of the rock star who wrote it.
Well, maybe with this COVID thing and we're all stuck at home and the theaters are all closed, maybe we can look at it as a blessing because so many people are going to be writing and there's going to be so much new works ready to go out there, and maybe the theater world is just hungry for something, and maybe we'll, as the new writers or new works get out there, we'll want to see everything and anything, and maybe we have to look at it that way and take advantage of it.
Yeah, and I think on a broader level, I mean, I remember lots of stories about the effect of 9/11 on the Broadway community. But if one kind of steps back a little, because I was complaining to you earlier about how the musicals of the 1990s weren't funny, but the musicals of the 2000s were pretty funny. I can name a lot of really funny shows. Dirty Rotten Scoundrels and, Spamalot, Drowsy Chaperone, whatever it is. It's like there've been a lot of funny musicals recently, but there weren't in that time period in the decade before 9/11, really.
Yeah. They made, tragedy plus timing equals comedy or whatever it is. It's something like that. So,
but I'm maybe agreeing with you that I think there's a hunger that will be created by the lack of our ability to go see a new musical live.
We're all looking forward to the days we can leave our house and head out there. So, well, Noel, thank you so much for coming on and talking to me today and telling us all about your stories. Now, before you go, I always ask 3 questions of all my interviews. There's no right or wrong answer, but there is a wrong answer. So be prepared.
That's one amazing sentence.
All right. Question number 1, Weber or Sondheim?
And by Weber, do you mean the turn of the century songwriter who teamed up with Lou Fields, Weber and Fields?
Yeah, of course. That's who I always mean when I say that.
Because John Paul, the British are laughing at you anytime you refer to Lloyd Webber as Weber, because it's incorrect. It's like that actor Daniel Day-Lewis. We know better than to refer to him as Mr. Lewis.
Yeah.
Is Mr. Day-Lewis. And the same thing is true of Lloyd Webber.
Yeah.
So you always have to say Lloyd, or else I'm not going to know who you mean.
Well, Andrew has not come on and complained yet, so until he does.
Right, I'm just worried about your British listeners, because I know podcasts go out internationally.
The funny thing is, none of them have pointed that out.
Okay.
Not one of them. So
I'm the first. You got to. whatever episode this is. So I don't know, Yazbek, Tesori.
There we go.
I mean, Tom Kitt.
I do like Tom Kitt. I have to admit that.
It's like you play a lot of wonderful songs on the musical theater radio, and I really appreciate how it's eclectic, and it's playing stuff that I haven't heard before, and it's playing stuff that's out there and from recent decades. Mm-hmm. But you've asked about two gentlemen who happen to have a birthday on the same day, this March, who aren't really part of contemporary musical theater. If you think of the last Sondheim hit show, well, we mentioned it earlier. It's Into the Woods, and that was playing way back in the 80s.
Yeah.
So it's like, I don't really think that Sondheim has been adding to our, sense of what musicals are out there in the way of Yazbek or Tesori or Flaherty and Ahrens or any of the contemporary writers who are continually turning out new musicals that we can appreciate. And I also think the same thing goes to Lloyd Webber, although Lloyd Webber has tried, but very few of his attempts have made it over here to America. I mean, School of Rock did, and Women in White played for a while, but outside of that, there's been no Lloyd Webber musical to hit Broadway in a big way since I think since Sunset Boulevard, which is
probably the 90s.
That's a long time ago. So it's like you're asking about two guys who hold a great place in history, but I'm going, John Paul, you know the contemporaries. Why are you asking me about these two old guys from so many decades ago?
And you know what? You gave me the correct answer.
Oh, good.
And that's why I leave
now
it
we know
open-ended.
that there was one incorrect answer. I've dodged that.
Exactly. No, I leave it open-ended like that so people do explore and talk. And that's fantastic what you did. So, and yeah, because I love to do that. I just want to hear how they react to those questions. So thank you. That was a great answer.
All right.
Okay. Question number 2. What musical best captures the essence of marriage? Since you wrote one, good or bad, which musical do you think captures the essence of marriage best?
Oh boy, the essence of marriage.
Yeah, or at least what you believe, good or bad.
All right, I have a strange choice.
Okay.
I'm going to choose March of the Falsettos.
Okay.
And March of the Falsettos starts with a marriage, starts with a man who wants to keep his wife happy and his son happy and keep that family together. And then he falls in love with a man and kind of starts a new relationship. And his wife then marries his therapist. So we then see a different sort of marriage. And really, it's a very short show that shows us rather realistically 3 kinds of marriages: a troubled one, a new homosexual one, and a new heterosexual one, in which there's a child involved. I mean, the same child is involved in all 3. And I think that for a really short show has a lot to say about marriage.
That's a great choice. I completely forgot about that show. So that was my first one that came to my mind was I Love My Wife.
Yeah,
which is a little bit different, but
yeah. See, I Love My Wife is really about an open marriage, which is a term you don't hear about a lot today. I think those of us who are kind of more into fidelity are kind of less likely to glom onto I Love My Wife. There's the show I Do,
yes,
which is nothing but a depiction of a marriage. And I think about that show a lot because there's only two people on stage. And I've been writing a show about a marriage with a cast of two for, I think, for the past 5 years now. And that, so that show, I Do, is kind of often on my mind because I'm wondering how to keep an audience entertained when you only have two performers.
Yeah, that's not a simple thing.
Limited number of possibilities.
Yep.
You can have a duet, you can have a male solo or a female solo, but that's not a lot of variety.
No. And there's so many shows out there. The Company, you could look at last 5 years.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was curious what could be thrown out there, but March of the Falsettos, that's a great answer. So answer number 2 is correct as well. And the final and most important question, audience members eating food in the theater, yes or no?
Why, you have an idea?
I'm just asking. I'm getting served.
No, I'm excited about your idea. In other words, you're picturing that there could be a musical in which somebody prepares food that the audience then eats. It's like a gourmet chef or a cooking show type music. I think this is a wonderful idea, John Paul, and I can't wait till you write it and I come see it and eat whatever that performer prepares.
I will see what I can do. I'm just testing the waters. I'm getting people's.
Well, about waters, you're reminding me about the first time I tasted wine was on stage at a Broadway theater.
Wow.
As you know, in the musical Godspell,
yep,
they serve little cups of wine to the audience during intermission. And I was 16 years old, and I marched right up and had myself some wine in front of a Broadway audience, because I could.
Yeah, that's funny.
So there's another good example of consumption in the theater.
All right, that one I will accept. There we go. 3 correct answers. Congratulations. The prize is my undying gratitude, I guess, for doing this. I don't know.
Well, I'm grateful too, but I'm really looking forward to the show you're writing about the gourmet chef.
Great. Now I got to do that. So thank you so much, Noel, for coming on and telling us your stories and talking to us about your life and career and everything.
Oh, it's a pleasure. The time flew by.
Awesome. All right. Well, be safe. Hopefully you and your family are good, and we'll come out this soon, I hope, and we get more of your shows on the stage so we can see them.
Thank you.
No problem. All right. So that was Noel Katz here on Be Our Guest on Musical Theater Radio. Tune in next week as we'll be talking to another guest or guests as we talk about their life, love, and passion. That is musical theaters. I am your host, as always, Jean-Paul Jovanov, and I will see you when I see you.